All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here with our preview and prediction for a Week 1 contest between the Marshall Thundering Herd and the Georgia Bulldogs. Lofty spread in this one, 39.5 in favor of Georgia, 55.5 the total. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN from Sanford Stadium in Athens, Georgia. Getting things started with the Bulldog defense going up against the Marshall offense. Now, obviously, this is a heavily depleted unit. This is a team who had a massive roster exile after Charles Huff in the school failed to reach an agreement on a new contract extension after a phenomenal 10-win season. So he ended up departing for a fellow Sun Conference team, Southern Miss. And obviously a lot of his players loved him, so they followed him over there. And they weren't able to play in the bowl game. They had to withdraw because of how many players had left the program. They couldn't field an active roster. So that shows you how much of a turnover Marshall's looking at going into Week 1 here against now one of the best teams in the country in the Georgia Bulldogs. And I'm not all that confident they're going to be able to produce a whole lot in this game. And you start with what they got at quarterback. Carlos Del Rio Wilson, he had recently played at Syracuse a couple of seasons ago and was not all that great. Zion Turner as well. In his previous stop was mainly just used as a runner. So the quarterback room isn't really all that promising, and it's a makeshift group collectively of, the offensive line, wide receivers, the running backs. I don't think the running backs are all that bad. I think Michael Allen from UNLV, Tony Mathis, I know he had some time at West Virginia in the past. I don't think those guys are all that bad, but you're not going to be able to run the ball against Georgia at all. SEC opponents can barely do it, so I highly doubt that Sun Belt team's going to be able to come in here and do it, Nick. And the thing about Georgia is they're going to be playing angry, right? They're going to be playing hyped up after last year. Obviously, they left a lot on the table. They were one and done in the playoffs. They still ended up winning the conference, of course, but had a couple of losses. Overall, just an underwhelming season, and 129 yards per game allowed on the ground is not what we're accustomed to seeing from Georgia for having elite skill and size on the D-line. Nothing but 5 stars and future NFL players in the linebacking group. I mean, talent is unreal for Georgia, and this defense just was not up to par like we typically see, right? So I think they're going to come out in this game and look to make a statement. It's going to be bad news bears for a team that added 21 guys in the portal, Nick, and I'm not impressed with either guy at quarterback. I think this could be a real rough outing for the Thundering Herd.
I'd argue that they had the worst offseason of any of the teams in the FBS college football because they just got absolutely gutted losing their head coach. The two sides couldn't reach a contract agreement. He ends up walking to an in-conference rival. That's got to blow. I thought Huff was a phenomenal coach when he was at Marshall, and I really, had a good record for that program, was able to get him to 10 wins. Last year was 32-20 over his 4 seasons. Took him to 4 straight bowl games. I mean, those are pretty impressive stats for a Marshall program and a Sun Belt program that is, I beg your pardon, a former MAC program in Marshall. So he ends up leaving the Southern Miss. I think they'll have a great season down there in Hattiesburg. But that leaves a massive hole for this Marshall team. They, like I said, they're probably the worst offseason of any team in college football, in my opinion. Just a brutal season. And I don't think this is going to be a very good game for them. I think they're going to in a whole lot of trouble here traveling down to Athens against, like you said, a Georgia team with a point to prove. They have a very valid point to prove, as they weren't really themselves last year, looked out of sorts on multiple different ways. When you look at this Marshall offense, I don't really love what they have at quarterback. Carlos Del Rio hasn't played since 2023, and during 2023, he had a 50% comp rate, 3 touchdowns and 6 picks at Syracuse in garbage time minutes. Not good enough. Zion Turner comes over from Jacksonville State. He hasn't played really at all recently either. He only played in 1 game last year, and he had only 1 pass attempt in that game. 2023, he had a couple passes here and there, but didn't do much either. So he's a guy that they're going to potentially rely on. I don't know who's going to be the starter for this game. I don't think it really matters. I think this team is just absolutely brutal for Marshall. They were great on offense last year, right? 31.8 points per game was a pretty solid number. 5.15 yards per attempt on the ground, 5.91 yards per play overall. I think Mathis and Michael Allen, that is, are decent back tandem for when they get the Sun Belt play. But I just don't think they're going to have anything chance to really do in this game. You look at the Georgia defense, right? It's still got a bunch of different guys that are going to step up. Got some of your household names like C.J. Allen, KJ Bolden, Dalen Everett, Juan Aguero. These are guys that are going to be really solid, reliable players. Christian Miller as well, who can all step up and be really strong for this team. 20.06 points per game, 20.6 points per game, that is, last year for the Georgia defense. Wasn't really the type of numbers you'd expect. You'd really expect that number to be a lot lower for them. They gave up 41 points to Alabama, 31 to Mississippi State. kind of uncharacteristic. 42 to Georgia Tech, certainly uncharacteristic. 21 to UMass, same deal. 20 to Florida as well. So definitely not the type of defense that Kirby Smart wants to have. They were still good against the run, 3.71 yards per play. Expect them to be good against the run again this year. 5.05 yards per play total. They had 3.71 yards per attempt. Expect them to dominate in the trenches in this game, absolutely overrun a new look Marshall offensive line and really overwhelm whatever quarterback's going to be under center for the Thundering Herd. Expect the defense to have a huge day and probably force a few turnovers.
I just don't think Zion Turner's that good of a passer. And Del Rio Wilson, he got a start for Syracuse back in 2023 against Boston College at home in the Dome. He had 37 yards and 4 interceptions. Now they're going to throw him into the home opener in Athens. He does have one good receiver they got from Akron. Adrian Norton had about 900 yards last year. Other than that, I'm not all that hype about who else they got. So could be a tough outing here. I think the quarterback room is really going to plague them in this contest. Moving to the other side of things, you look at a Georgia offense that's also themselves going to be looking to learn a lot. They're breaking in a lot of new starters. Gunnar Stockton got the nod against Notre Dame, played respectable in that contest, but obviously still a very young quarterback, and they went to the portal to get some new receivers. He's going to look to be building chemistry with guys like Noah Thomas, Zachariah Branch. Landon Humphreys is still incredibly young to the program. Colby Young didn't play a whole lot last year. Dylan Bell's a Swiss Army knife at pass catcher. They do have 2 nice tight ends in Oscar Delp and Lucky Lawson. So there's a lot here. I think these guys are going to get a long leash, though, Nick. I see them playing a full 3 quarters. I think that, Stockton, he needs to build time with these guys. We got tough opponents in Tennessee and Alabama right on the horizon in a couple weeks. So we're going to use these reps, even if it's a blowout game. We're going to take these serious, and we're going to use them to our advantage while we have them. I think the run game as well last year is looking to kind of, find the edge like the run defense is going to in this year, where they were disappointing. This run game only had one game of 170-plus yards last year. They've really struggled. Nate Frazier, obviously, is going to be the lead back. He's a guy I think the jury's still kind of out on him to see what he can do. And Josh McCray comes over from Illinois. He's a bit of a physical back. So there's a lot still to learn here with this offense when it comes to the supporting cast. Stockton needs minutes. The offensive line, I think you really feel good about with their size and their skill, but you're still going to be breaking in some new guys. Drew Bobo is a full-time center. Daniel Calhoun is the right guard now. Micah Morris will be a full-time guy at left guard. So there's a lot to still figure out for this offense as well, which leads me to think that they're going to play these guys a lot longer than we would typically see in a season opener blowout victory. Marshall last year, they were solid on defense, but everyone's gone. It was a quality group. Now we're going to add 26 players in the portal. In the second year, Green McKnight is really the only guy we're getting back that did, notable lick of anything last season. So the roster exile is brutal, Nick, because you're not just playing any week 1 opener. It's against Georgia, and it's a hungry team at that. And again, these guys are going to play long, meaningful snaps because they are important, because we need them.
This is an offense that wasn't really that good last year for Georgia. The stats are deceiving. 12 interceptions for Beck was pretty bad. The wide receivers had so many drops, and they just did not look like themselves. They plug in Gunnar Stockton here. I won't stay too long on him. I think he projects to be a pretty good starter, obviously. Until I see otherwise, I think he'll be a really good starter for this team. But again, you're just projecting a guy. He didn't really do a whole lot last year. So when he was in the game, I thought he looked solid in his reps. But overall, I think he'll be a good starter, similar to how I feel about Ty Simpson. I think both of them project to be pretty good starters. I'm not too concerned about that. The wide receiver room, a lot of people are high on this Georgia wide receiver room. I've seen a lot of conversations on social media recently talking about this unit, saying this could be a saving grace. I don't know if I really buy into that right now. I still got to wait and see. Noah Thomas, Zachariah Branch were 2 good adds, 2 guys that have some high upside potential. Thomas had 8 touchdowns and 575 yards for Texas A&M last year. Zachariah Branch, we know the speed for him out of USC. Over 500 yards receiving last year and a touchdown, though. But these guys got to be steady and serviceable early on. Dylan Bell, Colby Young, Landon Humphreys all return. These are guys that they can get solid production out of as they did last year. But these guys got to be good, right? They have to be strong. Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky at tight end are 2 really solid targets for him to rely on as well. The backfield kind of worries me overall long term. I think they'll be solid here. Nate Frazier went to Mater Dei, a pretty solid back, but he has to show that he's really could be that number 1 back in this offense. A by committee approach is still expected. Josh McCray, 600 yards and 10 scores last year. He could have a solid day in this matchup as well. I'm not concerned about what it looks like in this matchup. I think they will absolutely dominate this Marshall defense on the ground that, again, lost just about everybody, like you said. They brought in a bunch of different pieces, a who's who of guys from all over FCS and FBS. I don't know if any of these guys will be really that strong. The defense was solid last year, Marshall. 23 points per game, 4.42 yards per attempt on the ground, 5.41 yards per play. But when you plug in a completely new off defense, 26 players out of the portal, there's some good players, but I just don't know if I can really trust these guys in the fire pits week 1 on the road in Athens. Jadarius Green McKnight, I think, is a good player to return at safety. I think he can have a really solid season. He had a bunch of tackles, 3 pass breakups, and a pick last year. Expect him to have a solid game here, but I just think this will be all UG. I think the offense will absolutely dominate here. They should run a lot on the ground in this game, get those back comfortable, really let everyone kind of get in there. Let Stockton, don't do too much with Stockton, kind of put him comfortable, shelter him a little bit, let him get comfortable with his new wide receivers, the new pieces they've added. Playing time is certainly up for grabs for the wide receivers. Expect the offense to get a pretty long leash. I think that makes a ton of sense as well. The O-line has a huge edge, and they'll absolutely dominate, in my opinion. Expect UJ to score a lot of points here. They'll certainly clear that 31.5 points, I think, easily what they were scoring as their average last year. This should be a pretty dominant showing for this UJ offense against a Marshall defense that will be in a rough spot week 1.
The UGA group that had lots of issues last year, so they're going to look to showcase more effectiveness, need its top guys or receivers to stand out. You want them to build chemistry with Stockton early and often, and the entire 3 deep is transfers for Marshall's defense. So we're going to move to the final thoughts and the prediction, and obviously, what sense does it make to do this whole episode? And I just think Georgia's spread is the biggest lock of week 1, and that's why we're doing it, because there's some good information here. It's certainly a free winner in my eyes. I just think Georgia's going to blow them out badly in this one. 45-0, 45-3 type game is kind of the baseline. Pretty much whatever UJ wants to do, if they take their foot off the gas, and I think Marshall might be able to cover. But I really don't see Marshall being able to score really at all. The quarterback room is horrible. I think UGA, regardless of what string they're going to be playing, with the first, second, or third string guys, it's going to be a different attitude following last season. The books aren't dumb, so a 39-point line is certainly interesting because it probably should be higher. But I think the home team here is going to cover with ease against my favorite play of the week. And they've won cupcake games in the past of scores like 45-3, 48-3 2 years in a row. They beat UT Martin 48-7. So we're certainly splitting hairs and keeping it close based on needing a 40-point win. But again, I think we're going to see a nasty attitude here in the starters. At least on offense, they're going to see a bit longer of a leash because it really is important to them. So I think we're going to see a blowout here, and this is going to be my favorite bet of the week, Georgia minus 39.5.
UGA and Kirby Smart have a point to prove, and I think they can really do that week 1 and start to really put up a big notice, put up a lot of points. I won't be surprised they score over 60 points trying to make a point of emphasis here. I like the spread a lot. I think this makes a ton of sense when you look at it, right? 39.5, and they can get over that. I have them winning 52-3, which would end up covering that spread by about 10 points. So that'd be a really solid showing from this UGA team. I love what they have on offense, love what they have on defense. I think they're a really solid unit overall. And I just think Marshall is in a really tough spot. I think Marshall's in line for a really big dive this year. I think they'll be one of the worst teams in their conference. I just think there's too many moving pieces. I don't think the head coach hire was that good. I just think there's too many question marks bringing in so many different guys. When you lose your whole roster like that, I think you're bound for massive regression, and I think this is going to be a huge regression moment for this Marshall team. I think UGA's got a point to prove, and I think Marshall's a complete walking disaster. I expect a massive blowout. I like that spread as well. Maybe I'll even outline it a little bit and add some juice to it for myself. But overall, I think UGA wins this one pretty big and pretty comfortable in week 1.
That's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.